Bungwinzi, good morning. My name is Amy Amos. I'm the Executive Director for the Gwich'in Renewable Resources Board. And thank you for the opportunity to talk today. Before I get started in my talk, the elders have always told me that it's important to take a moment to introduce myself. So I was born in Inuvik, Northwest Territories. My mom is Gwich'in and my dad is mostly Scottish. I was raised with my dad in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and that's where I received my education. And I moved back to Inuvik in 2006 to work for my current employer. I was asked to talk about how the younger generation interprets the spirit and intent of the land claim. My talk today will focus on the work I do with the Gwich'in Renewable Resources Board, and that refers to chapters 12 and 13 of our land claim. First, I'll introduce the Gwich'in, the traditional management practices in our land claim. Then I'll go into how the board was established and what their mandate is, and how we interpret the spirit and intent of those chapters. I'll speak to some of the strengths and challenges and end with a summary. The Gwich'in are one of the most northerly Indigenous people on the North American continent, living at the northwestern limits of the boreal forest. Only the Inuit live further than us. We are part of a larger family of Indigenous people known as the Athabascans, but our language and way of life is distinct. At the time of contact with Euro-Canadians, we lived in 9 different bands with land stretching from Alaska, the Yukon, and into the Northwest Territories. In the Northwest Territories, there are 4 communities, and we have a population of around 3,400 people. We still maintain close cultural and family ties with our Gwich'in relatives in the Yukon and Alaska, and together we total over 6,000 people in 15 communities. Many families still maintain summer and winter camps outside of our communities. Hunting, fishing, and trapping remain important culturally and economically, with caribou, moose, and whitefish being the staples of our diet. This picture is of our office manager and some of our traditional clothing. The Gwich'in have always lived a traditional lifestyle, and we consider ourselves natural conservationists. When our people notice less of one species, we would switch and harvest something different to help let the original species recover. I've been told that the chief or the leader at the time would hold gatherings and talk to our people about this, and people would listen. This is important to remember as we keep that in the back of our minds as we look at modern land management practices and think of spirit and intent. The Gwich'in Comprehensive Land Claim Agreement was signed in 1992. At that time, I was 10 years old, living with my dad in Halifax. I had little exposure to my culture and my people, and I had no knowledge of what the land claim was or that one was being signed in my traditional territory. Our land claim includes a lot of different provisions and topics, but the one I'm here to talk to you today about is the management of our natural resources. The Gwich'in Renewable Resources Board was established out of our land claim as a co-management board. The board's mandate is to be the main instrument for wildlife, fish, and forest management within the Gwich'in settlement area, the green area on the map. This relates to Chapter 12 and 13 of our land claim, and everything the board does helps implement our land claim. There are 4 communities in our settlement area: Inuvik, Sigachik, Fort McPherson, and Aklavik. And in each of these 4 communities, there's also a local organization called the Renewable Resources Council. And their mandate is to encourage and promote local involvement in the conservation, harvesting studies, research, and wildlife management at the local level. We consider them our eyes and ears on the land. The board works very closely with the Renewable Resources Councils, and the board has skilled biologists and technical staff that help it accomplish its mandate and are actively in the communities. The board has a co-management structure. We have a chair and 6 members and 6 alternates. 3 of the members and their alternates are nominated by the Gwich'in Tribal Council, and 3 members and their alternates are nominated by government. The board is the decision maker of our organization. It acts in the public interest, and the members are independent once appointed. We do have some vacancies at this time, but the alternates does help the board in times when there's vacancies. The main powers of the board are to approve plans for management, conservation areas and parks, approve species at risk listings, define commercial use and activity, establish policies and regulations with respect to wildlife, fish, and forestry, have an independent research capability, limitation of harvest if that's ever required, and provide advice to government. So I was asked to talk about how do I interpret the spirit and intent of these chapters. For me, I was 10 years old living in the South, largely in a non-Indigenous environment with little exposure to my culture and no knowledge of the land claim itself when it was signed. I moved home almost 12 years ago, and since then I've been working for the board in several different biologist roles, which helped me understand the different areas the board is responsible for. I've also spent a lot of time getting to know my family, the people, and my culture. I think this is important when trying to think about what these chapters mean, especially in 2009 when I was promoted to be the board's executive director, because now I lead a team of 5 to 7 staff, and I have to ensure that we're properly following the board's direction and implementing those provisions. So it's important for my job that I understand what was originally intended in these chapters. So going into our land claim, Chapter 12, the beginning of Chapter 12 lays out some specific objectives. And when I read them, this is what I take as the core messages, that we need to manage responsibly to ensure there are resources for future generations and do it in an inclusive manner and honor traditional values. So, there are many provisions in Chapter 12 and 13. I chose these 5 as some of the key provisions to talk to you about today. I should note that this is my summary and interpretation of these provisions. 12.8.23G calls for the board to establish rules and procedures for the carrying out of any consultations. 12.8.37 talks about how the board and government should work in close collaboration and fully exchange information. 12.8.38 sets the board's research mandate, but in a way that doesn't duplicate existing research already being done. 12.8.40 ensures that the Renewable Resources Councils and the Gwich'in harvesters are directly involved in any research or harvesting studies conducted by the board or government to the greatest extent possible. And 12.9.5 ensures the board consults regularly with the Renewable Resources Councils with respect to matters within the board's jurisdiction. To interpret, I think it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture and how these provisions work together. I think these provisions tell us a lot. We need to work with the communities. We need to work with government and ensure that we're doing things together. We need good processes in place and explain how we will work together. And I think these provisions also give guidance to how the board needs to make decisions. Decisions and advice should always be made with the input from the communities and our partners. To me, it's clear that relationships were a fundamental component of what was thought of when establishing the board. So with spirit and intent in mind, I think there are many strengths the board has due to what was negotiated in our land claim. The following are some of the board's strengths. The claim sets out a strong foundation for us. Out of it, we established many guiding principles. We have a consultation policy, a strategic plan, research priorities. We have management plans for different species. We also have annual work plans and operating procedures. We respect traditional values. We had a strategic planning exercise this fall, and if you look at this photo, it shows the results of one of the breakout sessions on values. What sticks out to me is that we need to always keep traditional values in mind, remember where we come from and that we're managing for future generations. Two-eyed visioning is about traditional knowledge and science coming together equally. Keep teamwork and respect in mind, respect for everything, the land, the people, and ourselves, and ensure we have good communication. The land claim provided the board with a very good structure. We have a board that is composed of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people coming together in a positive, respectful way to conduct the business of the board. The nominating agencies need to be acknowledged because they're selecting good people for this board. We also have skilled staff that work really well together. We have a good team. Our chair was in community leadership during the land claim negotiation and ratification process. Both our chair and our office manager signed the land claim. So I wasn't here when the land claim was signed, but I am part of a team that was there, and now we help implement it together. I think this is definitely helpful when thinking about spirit and intent. The board and its staff also have put a lot of time and effort into building strong relationships. This is a picture from the board's strategic planning workshop 2 months ago held in Aklavik. At this time, there were board members, staff, and community members all working together at the same level to provide the board with direction. There was a really positive atmosphere there, lots of laughter and smiling. The board received direction in a positive and respectful way, and that tells me that we're doing something right. I think it's because we're inclusive, transparent, and respectful, and that builds trust and better working relationships. So one of the main challenges we face in respect to spirit and intent is interpretation of provisions that have not yet been utilized. For example, the board has the power to define what is considered commercial above traditional sharing. It hasn't needed to act on that provision yet, but it does have policies in place and has talked about it and sought advice from previous and current leaders, legal advice and community input on how it would do that when needed to do so. So, in summary, I was asked to speak about the spirit and intent, how the spirit and intent is interpreted in our modern land claim with respect to the work I do with the board. Some of the take-homes I recommend are that we need to remember why we're here, so to keep traditional values in mind. We need to step back and look at the bigger picture and read in between the lines and how these provisions work together. And in order for it to work, we need strong relationships and processes in place. A positive and respectful atmosphere goes a long way in achieving our common goal. To end, I just wanted to thank the organizers for asking me to present. It reminded me of one of the reasons I moved home. I wanted to help our future generations. I see a clear connection between the resources we use and our people, and this is one of the reasons I try my best to work with youth and encourage them to get involved in this field so that we can have more Gwich'in helping manage our resources on boards like the Gwich'in Renewable Resources Board. I'm an example of a Gwich'in that was raised in the South and came home, and I'm now involved in helping to implement our land claim. I'm proud to be here, and I hope you enjoyed my talk. Haicho, masicho, and thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name's Daniel Taselli. I'm Dene. I'm Kashogotine. I'm from Radley Co, which is known on the map as Fort Good Hope, Northwest Territories. It's a small community about 20 miles south of the Arctic Circle. It is in the Satu settlement area, and it's on the east side of the Big River, which is also known as the Mackenzie River. And I will get into a little bit more about that, but I'm going to follow in the footsteps of Amy and just give you a little more background because my elders have also told me that's important. My father is Kashogotine, and my mother is a settler, and she was born and raised on Onondaga land in what's known as Syracuse, New York State. So I wear a lot of hats, and I'm here today to speak specifically to my role as Kashogotine Chief Negotiator for our community self-government negotiations. And this is something I do through my work as an associate with Orpheus Clear Townshend LLP. But before I start talking about the Satu Dene Métis Comprehensive Land Claim Agreement, I want to give some context because this story goes back a long ways. And I want to start at the beginning. Well, not quite at the beginning because we'd have to go back to when the world was new and talk about that relationship and those lessons, and I only have 15 minutes. So I'm going to go back to about 1800, just before 1800, and this is when a Kashogotine was on the Big River, the Mackenzie River, and saw wood chips. And these were different from the wood chips that come from our traditional axes, our traditional stone axes. And so they knew there were different people upriver. And so the people got together, they deliberated, and they decided they were going to investigate. So they sent a man named Dry Loon, and they sent him upriver to find these new people because they knew there were new people with a different kind of tool. Dry Loon came back with reports of these new people, and they have these little sticks with fire in them, cigarettes or pipes, I don't know which. And he told everybody what he'd seen, and they deliberated again, and they decided they were going to meet these new people. So they went to the river and they found them. And that's how Kashugotinne discovered Alexander Mackenzie. And that was the start of our relationship with then British North America, later to become Canada. And the nature of that relationship for about 100 years was focused on the fur trade. And it was lucrative for both parties to have our people on the land, living our traditional lifestyle. That started to change around 1900, give or take a decade, with the discovery of significant hydrocarbon resources all up and down the Mackenzie Valley. And particularly for my people and the surrounding Dene Nations, the discovery of oil reserves at Norman Wells. And that really was the impetus for Canada entering into a treaty relationship with our people. There was resistance prior to these hydrocarbon discoveries by Canada to enter into a treaty relationship because there was really no benefit for them. After there was oil reserves found that could actually go into production, that's what led Canada to sign treaty with us. And if anyone's interested, this history is documented quite well in a book called As Long as This Land Shall Last. It was written by a priest named René Fumelo, and it's on the history of Treaty 8 and Treaty 11. So Treaty 11 is the treaty that Kashugotinne entered into. And like a lot of other treaties, it has a clause that claims we cede, release, surrender, and yield up all our land to the Queen, to the Crown. And like a lot of other treaties, this is not what our people actually discussed or agreed on. And this was a contentious issue for years and really came to the fore in a court case known as the Paulette Caveat back in the 70s. And this was a caveat, which is a type of claim for prior interest in land launched by a number of Dene chiefs. And what came out of that case was quite a bit of testimony about the signing of Treaty 11 and how that proceeded. And there was a lot of doubt cast on the legitimacy of those claims that we actually ceded, released, and surrendered our land. Following that, there were a number of years of negotiations by the broader Dene Nation for a very comprehensive land claim encompassing something like 450,000 square miles of our land and pushing for a Dene government. Those negotiations were not successful, and we ended up going to a regional claim structure, which is what we have now. And so, like Amy, I was 10 years old when my land claim was signed. I'm a participant to the Satu Dene and Métis Comprehensive Land Claim, and I apologize that I don't have maps, but our claim area is to the southwest of the Gwich'in claim area, which you just saw on the map. And that was signed actually I was 11, that was signed in 1993. And like Treaty 11, that land claim has a cede, release, and surrender clause. So in exchange for the rights guaranteed to us in the land claim, we cede and release and surrender a lot of land to the Crown. Out of that claim, we got large tracts of settlement land, but there are also large tracts of Crown land that is still public land. And so another thing that comes out of that land claim is a commitment to negotiate self-government agreements. And that's the experience personally that I have with implementing that land claim agreement, is that I'm the chief negotiator on my community's self-government negotiations. So we're working on negotiating a self-government agreement with Canada and the government of the Northwest Territories for Fort Good Hope and for our portion of Kashugotinne District. Our land claim divides the land up into 3 districts, and in Kashugotinne District, there's Fort Good Hope and Cova Lake, and both of our communities are independently negotiating self-government agreements. How much is the time? Right. So, and I want to preface these next comments by just saying that I understand. I grew up going to a lot of meetings. I grew up in Dene Nation meetings. I know a lot of the people who've been putting in the work for decades, and I know there's people in this room, and there's a lot of people back north and everywhere else who have spent decades and given a lot of sweat and tears, and hopefully not blood, but a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of their life, not just negotiating these agreements, but doing things like getting Aboriginal rights enshrined in Canada's Constitution. There are people who have dedicated their lives to establishing these things and trying to make it work. So I'm not casting blame here. But personally, as a young person who was not politically cognizant when these agreements were signed, and specifically the Satu land claim agreement, coming into the fold as an adult and taking on this role has been difficult because there is a strong view among my elders that we did not give up the land and that we still own the land. And not own, but that it is still Kashugotinne land, that we still have that relationship with it, that we did not cede, release, and surrender it to Canada or the government of the Northwest Territories, and that our obligations and responsibilities to care for that land still remain, and that we need to reflect that in a self-government agreement. And it is incredibly difficult to be the young person who has to tell your elders that we gave that land away. And so I've been doing this work as a chief negotiator since January, and in that short amount of time, have gotten a very clear mandate from my elders in my community to do everything that I can and that we can do as a negotiating team to essentially get our land back, to get as much jurisdiction over our land as we can. And our land is not just the Satu settlement area where we have settlement lands. It includes the crown lands in the settlement area, and to a lot of people, it includes the shared jurisdiction that we traditionally had with other nations. So this includes land over the mountains in areas like Yukon. It includes land to the north and to the south. And this is difficult because this is clearly off the table according to government, and particularly now the government of the Northwest Territories, who after the devolution agreement has a lot more control over the land and is very intent on keeping that control. And so I wanted to stress that, because land to our people is incredibly important. It's everything. And when we use that term land, we mean everything. We mean water, we mean trees, we mean animals, we mean the ancestors. We use that term to encompass everything, and what the land, everything that term encompasses is everything to us. That's the root of our language, our culture, and aspects of our spirituality. And we need to keep that, we need to maintain that relationship with that. And so I think as young people who are now stepping up to take on these roles of doing this work, we have our work cut out for us, because we're looking not just at implementing the terms of these agreements, but we're looking at a mandate in a lot of cases that involves doing what we can to rework these agreements. Through these processes and through other processes, we need to think outside the box sometimes. And there is, I think, some hope with Canada's commitment to new relationships with Indigenous people. And a lot of talk about things like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And there's no clarity yet what these types of commitments mean at the negotiating table, or what they mean for land and for any kind of shared jurisdiction over land. We're not looking to kick out Canada, but we want to share that jurisdiction. But there is hope to be able to leverage some kind of additional jurisdiction over land. And I think we also have to look at this in the big picture, and we have a constitutional right to be a self-government. That's in the Canadian Constitution. We have that relationship. And when we look at the history, we see that Canada's constitution is not set in stone. It changes rather significantly over the time. And so I think as young people, we have to have hope that we can actually do this work and we can change things very fundamentally to be able to do what our elders are telling us to do. And I just want to throw that out there to everyone in this room, because I think we probably, there's enough people here that we're seeing each other on all sides of these negotiating tables, and that's something to keep in mind. So thank you, Masi Cho. I appreciate your time today.
Aja Chepot, Checha Tanapech, Imots, Quagans, Quananape. My name is Dylan Johnson. I'm from the Tla'amin Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge the Algonquin for allowing us to gather here today. And I'd also like to thank the LCAC for the invitation. This is my first LCAC conference here, and I've got to be, I'm actually quite impressed with how well organized everything is, and very impressed with the speakers. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Patty, for your team and for all the seamless organization. So I'm also happy to be here because I'm grouped with the younger generation, which I don't know how much longer I can get away with that, but take full advantage of it while I can. So my traditional Tla'amin name is Toquanan. I was born and raised up in Tla'amin, which is, here, let me see here. There we go. Just north of Vancouver by about 200 kilometers. And it's got the Sliaman, which is the former name of the Indian band. Now we're a modern treaty nation with reverted to the traditional name of Tla'amin. And you'll see Vancouver down here on the bottom right. And it's a couple ferry rides away to get up to Tla'amin, which neighbors the town and region now known as Powell River. It's the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, although kind of a misnomer because it rains there at least 300 days a year. So I just have a couple of slides. And just by way of background, I work and live in North Vancouver. I'm a contractor. I work for a number of nations throughout BC, organizations, always representing Indigenous communities or organizations. Of course, I travel up back home at least once a month or sometimes more often to work on community initiatives, planning initiatives, and I'm kind of the fiscal finance resource for the nation. And I was on council for 6 years, so I did a commerce degree in Victoria. I was in commercial banking, and then I did an MBA in Ontario, and then I joined back working for the community as a counselor and then as a consultant. So that's a little bit about myself. And so again, that's where we're located, and I just want to flash over past these because that's for another presentation. But this is I guess now the Tla'amin Nation and our land holdings up there in our territory. It comprises about 70 kilometers of waterfront and a bit of land in the town area. So that's kind of, I guess, in the short term, economic development land opportunities there. The final agreement, of course, includes water rights, hunting rights, and fishing rights, and et cetera. But in terms of the topic of the presentation, reflecting on implementation, similarly with my co-panelists here, I was never part of the negotiating team or efforts. I was away at school, living elsewhere. And then upon my return, the negotiating was all said and done, and now it was time to, you know, implement and interpret what had been agreed to. So, and I guess in contrast to my co-panelists, I offer a perspective where we've really only just begun the implementation. So our effective date was April 5th, 2016. Voted on in 2012, but the effective date was pushed to 2016. So we're only a year and a half into this thing, and it's quite a lot to unpack. And we're still just getting our feet under it, and under us, I should say. And so I guess currently, when I was on council, I actually helped, you know, approve and develop a lot of the laws and rules that are currently in place. And now I've stepped away from my elected official role. I've just functioned as an advisor with the nation. And I guess I'm involved in 3 ways. The first is I'm constantly reminding and advising leadership and administration of the provision and rules of this new regime. And I'm probably a thorn in their side, actually, at most times, because I'm pointing out provisions in, you know, whether it's the final agreement or one of the side agreements or you know, our own laws and regs and policies, et cetera. So there is a tendency, and hopefully this will kind of fade away, but there's a tendency to revert back to, you know, how we did it pre-treaty or like the Indian Act way. Something we kind of got to get past. People, the last thing they want to do is flip through a 100-page document and look at the actual rules in black and white. They just kind of go with what they've been either, you know, doing or forced to do over the past 100 years. So that's a bit of a transition and a constant effort in communicating and reminding. And kind of thinking of the older generation, there was a constitution that we had developed. It included a lot of community consultation. This was started over a decade ago, and it took a couple of years, and then it was passed in 2009, and that enshrines, you know, all the things that a constitution does. But a lot of the people that helped craft and develop that constitution have now passed away. Our elders, I'm sure this is common with most of the communities, are passing too quickly. So a lot of those people that helped, you know, enshrine those values and principles in that document are now gone. So part of my responsibility, I guess, is to keep, again, reminding us what our Constitution says. And also, we went through quite an extensive process in passing our laws and regs and policies. And that involved community members, community meetings, a lot of discussion. And yeah, I mean, it's just important, again, to keep that in mind. As an example, like, we've set up this economic development framework and corporation, like, it's all based on limited partnerships. And I could go on and on about the complexities of that structure, but again, it seems like to be a constant battle to remind our elected officials that they aren't necessarily in charge now of making all the business decisions. We've set up institutions, and we've assigned or delegated authorities to them. We need to respect those boundaries, those types of things. So, of course, that's easy for me to say. I'm no longer a politician or elected official. They are held accountable, kind of, you know, a lot stronger. So I can see why they do want to influence all these things. But we've set up rules, and that's the beauty of self-government, is we can, you know, establish our own rules. But now we need to follow them. Second thing I guess I help a lot with is developing new areas of law and new areas to draw down. There we've set up a community working group. It's called the Implementation Community Working Group, and it's elected officials, staff members, community members, and technicians such as myself, and legal representation. And what we do is, like, currently we're working on a new post-secondary policy that will replace, you know, the INAC one that we're so familiar with, and be able to make our own kind of decisions on who we want to fund and what priorities to set in that area. And that's an initiative that's coming through this community working group, which is a very positive thing. And then we're revisiting some other laws that, you know, we may have not thought of the full picture when we had developed it and passed it. Now it's in application, we have to test certain things within them, and sometimes it doesn't always make sense, and we wish we had done it differently. So it's the task of this group to go through that process of proposing revisions, and then it goes through the legislature. And then finally, the last thing I do is I negotiate with, and actually I guess more recently collaborate with, BC and Canada on a number of issues, again mostly related to fiscal matters. There's a collaborative fiscal policy process that's underway. There's a presentation tomorrow on that. But anyway, acknowledge the important work that's going on there between self-governing nations and INAC. But also that we have a list of issues with British Columbia, implementation issues that we visit regularly to really negotiate with British Columbia. And that's something I represent the nation's interests on, which I'm very happy to do so. And how are we doing for time? Good? Okay. I guess in closing, my efforts in implementing this new agreement is just constantly trying to steer and represent my nation in ways that will improve the conditions within the community. And I believe that is the whole idea behind this modern treaty. The vision of our old generation, some of which have passed and some of which are still here, is that the treaty is to make the lives of our people better and increase the opportunities of Tla'amin people. So I've kind of taken it upon myself to, in my limited role in the fiscal finance area, to carry that torch forward. And pleased to say that there's a generation, my generation and even younger, who are leaders within their own areas, whether that be the cultural ways, environmental stewardship. So I'm very positive in the prospects of our future. So those are my remarks. I hope I wasn't too short, but thank you for your time.